The Predator's Instinct, the Architect's Protégé. Movement 2, the Anatomy of the Social Hunt. The gallery air was thick with the scent of vanity, a mixture of expensive oud and the metallic tang of hidden agendas. Elias moved through the crowd not as a participant, but as a ghost haunting a machine. Every gesture he witnessed was a data point. Every hushed conversation was a confession. He was no longer just Elias. He was a walking manifestation of the architect's final blueprints. He was the total mind control theory applied to the chaos of high society London. He moved toward the center of the room, where the true power lived. This was the Enigma protocol in action. By walking slowly, with a deliberate rhythmic gait that ignored the frantic energy around him, he established himself as the dominant frequency in the room. He wasn't looking for attention, which is exactly why the attention began to bleed toward him. He felt the gaze of Julian Thorne. Julian was a legendary figure in the city's shadow banking sectors, a man who had perfected the cold presence long before Elias had even heard of the architect. Julian didn't just walk into a room, he annexed it. He was surrounded by a phalanx of sycophants, each trying to mirror his stoic posture, but failing because their eyes still held the flicker of information scarcity panic. Julian signaled his group to stay back and approached Elias. This was a predator recognizing another apex hunter in his territory. "You have a very particular stillness about you," Julian said, his voice a gravelly rasp. He used the dominant hand gesture, placing his hand briefly on Elias's shoulder, a classic move to establish seniority and physical dominance. Elias didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. To pull away would be to acknowledge the threat. Instead, he simply looked down at Julian's hand, then back into Julian's eyes with a look of clinical detachment. He waited exactly 4 seconds, a strategic use of silence before speaking. "Stillness is only terrifying to those who are running away from themselves, Julian," Elias replied. His voice was devoid of inflection, a technique used to deny the listener any emotional hooks to grab onto. The sycophants behind Julian gasped. No one spoke to Julian Thorne this way, but Elias was utilizing the 7 secrets of respect. He wasn't being rude, he was being equal. In the world of power, if you treat a king like a king, you are a subject. If you treat a king like a peer, you are a threat. If you treat a king as an interesting specimen, you are the master. Movement 3, the mirror trap and the cracking of the code. Julian's eyes narrowed. He shifted his weight, his body language transitioning from aggressive dominance to intellectual evaluation. He realized his standard tactics wouldn't work. He decided to switch to the mirror trap. He began to slow his speech to match Elias's, trying to build a false rapport to extract information. "You're a student of the dark arts, I see," Julian whispered, leaning in to create a false sense of intimacy, an emotional domination tactic. "Who was your teacher? Varga, or perhaps the old man in the library?" Elias allowed a faint predatory smile to touch his lips. "The architect doesn't have students, Julian. He has legacies. And you have employees. There is a profound difference." He began the cold scan. He noticed the way Julian's jaw tightened, the Masseter Leak. It was a sign of suppressed rage and a need for control. He saw the way Julian's fingers twitched toward his left cufflink, a security blanket gesture. Despite his billions, Julian Thorne was deeply insecure about his legacy. He wasn't afraid of losing money, he was afraid of being forgotten. "You're building towers, Julian, because you're afraid your name won't outlast your pulse," Elias said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that forced Julian to lean in further, compromising his physical balance. "Every deal you make is a desperate prayer for immortality, but in this room,
"You're the most mortal man I see." The effect was instantaneous. Julian's carefully maintained invisible crown slipped. His face reddened, his breathing became shallow, a total collapse of body language mastery. For the first time in a decade, Julian Thorne was naked in public. "Who are you?" Julian hissed, the predator's instinct finally turning into prey panic. "I am the reflection of everything you try to hide," Elias said, turning his back on Julian, the ultimate social dismissal. By walking away while Julian was still speaking, Elias asserted absolute control over the interaction's conclusion. He had used social manipulation to turn the city's most feared man into a stuttering ghost. Movement 4. The strategic vulnerability. As Elias moved toward the exit, he was intercepted by a younger woman, Sophia. She was a different kind of predator, one who used strategic vulnerability as her primary weapon. She looked disheveled, her eyes watery, a textbook damsel in the distress archetype designed to bypass the defenses of high-status men. "Please," she whispered, grabbing Elias's arm. "I saw what you did to Julian. You shouldn't have done that. He's dangerous. You need to leave before his security arrives." Elias looked at her. He saw the way her hand trembled on his arm, a directed leak. It was too perfect. Real fear is messy. Her fear was cinematic. She was a plant, a honey trap, sent to see if the architect's chessboard had a soft spot for empathy. Elias softened his posture. He allowed his shoulders to drop, his eyes to lose their cold presence. He played the role of the arrogant victor who had just let down his guard. "I'm not afraid of Julian," Elias said, his voice gaining a slight, weak, ego-driven edge. Sophia's eyes sparked. She thought she had him. She led him toward a quiet balcony, away from the eyes of the gallery. "He has files on everyone. He knows things that could ruin you. Let me help you. I have the key to his private server." Elias followed her, playing the part of the manipulated fool perfectly. He was using the reverse mirror, letting her think she was leading him, while he was actually leading her into a psychological dead end. Once on the balcony, Sophia's demeanor changed. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp efficiency. She pulled out a small recording device. "You've said enough, Elias. Julian Thorne doesn't like being embarrassed, but he loves hiring talent. You can work for us, or you can disappear." Elias didn't react. He looked out at the city lights, the invisible crown returning to his brow with a terrifying intensity. "You made one mistake, Sophia," Elias said, his voice as cold as the rain hitting the glass. "I've been jamming your recorder since we left the hall, and I've been broadcasting your confession to Julian's internal security network for the last 5 minutes. He now thinks you are the traitor trying to sell his server keys." Sophia's face went pale. The predator was now the prey. She had been outmaneuvered by a man who didn't just play the game, he rewrote the rules as he went. Movement 5. The architect's shadow lingers. Elias walked out of the gallery and into the London night. The rain was heavy now, but he didn't feel the cold. He had integrated every lesson: the respect, the body language, the manipulation, the domination, and the silence had become a single fluid instinct. He walked toward a black sedan waiting at the corner. The window rolled down, revealing the architect. The old man's eyes were as unreadable as ever, reflecting the neon lights of the city. "You were loud tonight, Elias. A master never is loud," the architect said. "I wasn't being loud, architect," Elias replied, his voice matching the old man's resonance. "I was setting a fire to see who would try to put it out." The architect stared at him for a long moment, then gave a single, slow nod, the ultimate validation. "The student phase is truly over, Elias. You have moved from the library to the labyrinth. But remember, the deeper you go into the shadows, the harder it is to tell your own shadow from the ones you chase. Elias stepped into the car. He felt the weight of the invisible crown, not as a burden, but as a part of his anatomy. He was no longer a protege, he was a force of nature. He was the shadow mind in the flesh. The car moved into the traffic, disappearing into the sea of lights. In a world full of noise, Elias was the silent command that the world was about to obey.